All right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And we are particularly excited this month of October because this is our biggest month we've ever done. We say that almost every month, but it's true. We just keep adding on more and more. And so by the 31st, it will have been 60 sessions from people around the world, and a lot of them have been highlighting space. So we've had astronomers, astronauts, engineers, technicians, and more highlighting amazing natural phenomena throughout the solar system. And today's a little bit different, and we're going to explore that in just a minute when I introduce our speaker. For now, I want to give our classes a chance to say hi. So we've got Miss Der Halls, grade 5s in Canton, Michigan. Hi, guys. Hey. We've got Miss Elliott's grade 6s in Dallas in Texas. Hi, guys. Hey. And slightly with some technical difficulties, but hopefully they can hear me all good. We've got Miss Holland's grade 7s in Bentonville in Arkansas. Let's see. Oh, they're there. They're there and they're excited. We believe it. All right. Of course, the reason you guys are all joining us for our speaker. So we are joined live in Toronto by David Makepeace, and he is Canada's foremost, I don't even know why Canada's in this thing. He's probably the world's foremost eclipse chaser. He has seen 23 eclipses in 15 countries on every single continent. And so he's done a variety of sessions with us before, and it's always a great time exploring one of the world's most amazing natural phenomena, one of the most amazing and unique natural phenomena in the entire solar system. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to David. Thanks so much for joining us, and take it away.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody around the universe, and especially you guys who are actually still in class right now. I'm really happy to be a part of Space Month here on Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. It's a great opportunity to get into some topics that we don't normally talk about, and it gives me a chance to talk about my favorite thing in the entire universe, and that is the total eclipse of the sun. It's not something that we talk about all that much, and it's not something that you're likely to see unless you make an effort to go and see it. Like I did many years ago. I was very lucky for my first time when I saw a total eclipse of the sun. I landed in Mexico to visit a friend of mine, and I saw the most amazing thing in the sky that I've ever seen in my entire life. This is the thing about seeing a total eclipse of the sun, is that you're not prepared for it. You don't realize how amazing it is going to be. And that completely changed my life. After I saw my first total eclipse, I've spent the last almost 30 years trying to go to every eclipse that I could possibly see on the Earth, because the experience of being there when it happens is the most amazing thing. It is the most spectacular event that you can witness from the Earth. So when you talk about trying to understand what's happening in space, and we're hearing on Space Month from astronauts and engineers and scientists who are involved in trying to understand what is happening in space and what is happening in our solar system, the cool thing about the total eclipse of the sun is that you can actually participate in it with your own eyes. You're standing on the surface of the Earth as the moon is moving in front of the sun, and you can witness the clockwork motion of the solar system. And for me, this is probably the coolest thing that you could possibly do. And I've done it over and over and over again because I just can't get enough of it. When I saw my first eclipse, here's what it was like. That's what it was like. And all the other over 20 eclipses that I've seen, here's what it's like. Okay, so we're talking about the most amazing experience that you can possibly have. So let's get into it. You guys know what an eclipse of the sun looks like, right? It's basically the moon moving in front of the sun, and the moon blocks out the sun. It goes dark, planets and stars appear in the sky. Well, you know what? Let's actually take a look at what this looks like with a little animation that I have here. You guys see that?
Yeah, you're perfect.
So what we have with the total eclipse of the sun, let's take this back to the beginning, is the moon moving in front of the sun. And here comes the moon in its normal orbit. It does this every day. And this is the action of the moon that causes a total eclipse. And here it comes. So this is the total eclipse of the sun. It's just as simple as could possibly be. You have these two objects in the sky, the sun and the moon on this day just happens to move in front of the sun. And the cool thing that it does is it reveals the atmosphere of the sun. And that's what all this white, wispy brushes and streamers on the outside of the atmosphere of the sun, it allows you to see that. And you get to stand in the shadow of the moon for maybe a couple of minutes, and then the moon just keeps moving in its orbit. And then it leaves the sun, and then it just continues to go. So let me back this up just so that we fully understand the celestial mechanics of this, because the moon moves around the Earth every month, but it doesn't always block out the sun like this. It only does that during special times, and these times are very predictable. So the moon moving like this is a very normal thing. The moon is just moving in its orbit the way that it always does, except on this day, it's perfectly lined up with the sun, and you get this type of phenomenon where you on the Earth and the moon and the sun are in a complete line. It's a totally straight line. This is called the alignment. And this is why it is so special, because the moon is the perfect size to block out the sun, allowing you to see the atmosphere of the sun, which is there every single day, but you can't see it. And why? Because the sun is so bright. The photosphere, or the surface part of the sun, is so bright you can't see it unless something comes along to block it out. And then the moon, it just keeps going in its orbit, and then it moves off, and the phenomenon is over. So let's take a look at this in a little bit more detail, because the action of this is really fantastic. So here's the alignment that I was talking about. You've got the sun here. You've got the moon now right in the middle, and it's dropping its shadow down onto the surface of the Earth. And when we're talking about witnessing a total eclipse of the sun, everything is about the shadow of the moon and the shadow falling down onto the surface of the Earth, so you can go stand in the shadow of the moon. So let's watch this as we come around now. Look how long the shadow of the moon is. This shadow is about 400,000 kilometers long. That's basically how far away the moon is. And when the alignment is perfect, it drops this long needle nose shadow down onto the surface of the Earth. So this tiny little dot right in here, that's the shadow of the moon, which is now blocking out the sun, projected onto the Earth. And this tiny little dot here, it's only about 100 kilometers wide. So when you think about how big the solar system is, that's a really tiny little spot. 100 kilometers wide is really, really small. But because of the science and because of the predictability of eclipses, we can figure out well in advance where the shadow of the moon is going to fall and the path of the eclipse that it's going to carve out along the surface of the Earth. That's this red path that you see right here. And as I start the eclipse up again and it moves, you can see that this predictable path of the eclipse carves out this long path of totality along the surface of the Earth. And when you're an eclipse chaser, you need to know exactly when and where you have to stand. So when the shadow of the moon comes along, boom, the sun will finally be blocked out by the moon. So that gives you the basic celestial mechanics of how eclipses happen. And this is a real shot of an eclipse right here. So this is not an animation anymore. This is a real photograph. So it looks very much like what we just saw. Here's the moon. We have the alignment. We're in a perfect line. So the Earth, Moon, Sun are lined up, and we're revealing the atmosphere of the sun. This is called the corona, which sort of means crown. It's like the crown of the sun. And this is the most spectacular thing that you can see from Earth. It's very hard to get the idea from a picture or from a video, but when you're standing there yourself and you're peering at the eclipse with your own eyes, it is one of the most fantastic things that you could possibly witness from Earth. And I've had an amazing time taking photographs and making films about this. Now take a look at this photograph. This is how long the corona can actually be if you expose the photograph in the right way. So this is millions of kilometers out into space that this atmosphere of the sun actually has. Very difficult to see this with the naked eye, but with some photography, you can actually see the full extent of the corona. So imagine seeing this in the sky. If you looked up and saw this, this is why it's so fantastic. You can also see eclipses from planes. Look at this circle of shadow at the bottom of this image. That's the actual circular shadow of the moon on the Earth that we saw just a moment ago in that animation. Here's the moon and the sun together right here. There's the eclipse, there's the corona, and we're in a plane flying along with the shadow as it moves along the Earth. Absolutely spectacular type of experience. Look at this. This is in Australia a couple of years ago. Here's my friends. We flew into the middle of the desert, and here's the eclipse right here. So it's a very beautiful event. It's a very beautiful thing to see in the sky because it's unlike any other kind of day. Look at this that my friend took. This is Easter Island. You recognize the moai here, these terrific statues from Easter Island with the eclipse here. So eclipse chasing gets you to so many places around the Earth, places that you never thought that you would ever visit. But wherever that path of the eclipse goes, that's where eclipse chasers go. And that's, you have to travel if you want to stand in the shadow of the moon. Look at these terrific photographs. This is from South America in 2010. So you see the dark part here, and it sort of goes underneath the horizon. And look at the dark part here. That is the actual shadow of the moon jumping off the backside of the moon and coming towards Earth. So this is what it looks like when you stand in that 100-kilometer wide circle of shadow. So this is outside the eclipse. The light part's here. That's outside the eclipse on that side. But inside, this is that giant cone of shadow that you stand in, which blocks out the sun right there. Extremely exciting to see this when you're there for yourself. And here's the moment here where the moon starts to move off. And then all the bright sunlight comes back, and all that sun brings the sky back, and it brings light to the Earth again, and the eclipse is over. Also extremely exciting and really great. So let's take a look at this quick video. Oh, I got corona. I got corona. I have corona.
Yeah. There it is. The reflection of the water. 10 seconds. Woo!
Diamond ring. Look. Oh my God. Whoa! Oh my God. Look. Providence.
Wow. Woo! Oh my God. Whoa.
Check that out.
Woo! Wow.
Look at it. Oh, look at the cone of the shadow. See? Look at this. This is the shadow. Like this. So as you can tell from that video, people go crazy during a total eclipse because it's the most amazing thing that you've ever seen in your life. And chasing this event has allowed me to get to some of the most amazing places on the world. And I've been just so grateful to be involved in this hobby because it's allowed me to travel to some of the most amazing places in the world. And I've been doing this for so long now that I've been able to see an eclipse on every continent. That includes way up high in the Arctic in the north and way down south in Antarctica, where we saw an eclipse there in 2003, and we're going again there in a couple of years. So talk about one of the most exciting hobbies that you could possibly have, learning about the solar system, learning about the Earth and the moon and the sun and how we got here in the first place, and also exploring the world. It's been probably the most tremendous hobby that I could possibly imagine. And it's been really fun to get some great shots of some of the places that I've been so that I can remember all the adventures that I've had, like this one where we're in Australia. And when we went down to Antarctica in 2003, I was able to see the eclipse with penguins all around me. That was absolutely fantastic. I never thought I'd see penguins. I've been across the states a number of times. Here I am in Arizona having the time of my life. I got to go to Indonesia, the islands of Indonesia in 2016 to see an eclipse standing on a volcano. I never thought I'd do that either, but eclipses have allowed me to do that. I also got the chance in 2006 to go to the Sahara Desert in Libya to see an eclipse, which might be my favorite eclipse of all time because we had the most beautiful skies, beautiful conditions, and the eclipse lasted over 4 minutes, which is a really long time for eclipses. So that gives you an idea of how exciting this is and what it is that we're actually chasing. But the science of it is absolutely critical. So let's find out why we don't get eclipses every single month. Because as we can see here, The moon moves around the Earth every month. We know that. October, November, December, every month, the moon is moving around the Earth. But the shadow doesn't always touch the Earth. Most of the time, the moon's shadow misses the Earth by just a little bit. But it's every once in a while, when the eclipse time comes around, that the moon's shadow actually does touch down on the Earth. And this is when the conditions for a total eclipse of the sun start to happen. And this is what eclipse chasers are interested in. Let's take a look at this a little bit more closely. Here's the alignment between the sun, the moon, and the Earth, giving us the conditions for the shadow of the moon to actually touch down on the Earth. Look how long and thin the shadow of the moon is. If the moon was even just a little bit more further away, we would never see a total eclipse. That little 100-kilometer wide dot of shadow that you have to stand in might easily disappear if the moon was just a little bit further away. It almost seems like this phenomenon is impossible, but it is possible, and it is predictable, so you can go and see this as long as you know where to go. So let's take a look at this again in more detail, because it almost seems impossible that this could happen because of how long and thin the shadow of the moon is. But understanding the shadow action, understanding the science behind the movements of the planets in the solar system allow us to understand this type of phenomenon very carefully and very specifically, so that eclipse chasers, when they're making their planning, they need to know exactly where the shadow of the moon is going to fall so that you can make your travel plans. And in the last number of years, NASA has developed some very high-tech types of maps that help us understand exactly where we need to go. So here's a close-up view of what eclipse chasers are using these days to try to figure out where we have to stand. Where is the shadow of the moon going to fall? How long is the eclipse going to last? And this type of planning is critical if you want to see an eclipse. But fortunately, these days, it's really easy to get a hold of this type of scientific information because it's made available to the public. So this type of animation, this type of map shows you very specifically where the shadow of the moon will fall and where you have to stand if you want to see a total eclipse of the sun, which I highly recommend to everybody who's listening to this right now. It is something absolutely not to be missed. So I want to show you some real pictures now, some real video that I took recently in 2016 on that volcano that I was talking about in Indonesia. So here's the path of the eclipse. There's where I'm standing and take a look at the shadow coming into us right now. Watch this again. Watch the sun. Watch it get taken out by the moon. Just fantastic. Watch this again. Watch the shadow move across these clouds and then darken the horizon over here. Watch this. That is tremendous video. Look how dark it gets. It's almost as if the eclipse is a giant light switch, turning daytime into night in a matter of seconds. And on this camera angle, you can see the leading edge of the moon shadow in the sky. There's a total eclipse on this side, but not quite yet on this side. This is some of the most incredible footage that I've been able to get of the dynamics of the shadow moving through the sky. The way that it's all dark on this side and the total eclipse is happening, and we're still outside of the eclipse over on this side. That means the leading edge of the shadow is right here. So I find that incredibly exciting. And as you can see, this is me standing here with my arms up. I'm having a pretty good time watching this because it's probably the most exciting thing that you can possibly see from the Earth. Here's a great little piece of video from China in 2008. Look at the shadow of the moon sweeping in at our location. It really does turn daytime into night in a matter of seconds. And if I could play you the sound for this, you'd hear everybody screaming and hollering and losing their minds because this is the most fantastic thing that you can possibly see from Earth. So let's take a look at some of the facts and some of the things that we can learn about eclipses so that we understand them a little bit better. One of the greatest things is that they actually are predictable. If we didn't know when eclipses were happening, we'd probably miss them all the time, but they are predictable, both forwards and backwards through time. So if you want to research eclipses and find out when the eclipses were back throughout the centuries, you can easily do that because we know exactly when total eclipses are going to happen. If you want to chase eclipses, you need to know when that they're happening. So they don't happen all the time, but they do happen about every 18 months on average. So sometimes you have to wait only a year, sometimes you have to wait 3 years, but a total solar eclipse will occur on average about every 18 months, which means you have enough time to save your money and get out there and do some amazing traveling. Here's a really interesting fact about eclipses. A total eclipse of the sun can be seen from the same place on Earth every 375 years. So if you're not interested in traveling and you want to stay put and let the eclipse come to you, you're going to be 375 years old before the eclipse comes around. So I'm not sure if that's going to be a really great strategy for seeing the eclipse. Here's the other interesting thing about eclipses, or I should say another interesting thing, is that they're not isolated events or random events. They are part of a cycle that repeats over and over again every 18 years, 11 days. And this is because the moon moves around the Earth in the same way every 18 years, 11 days, and then it does the same cycle over and over again. So what you get are identical eclipses that are occurring after a period of 18 years, and this repeating cycle of eclipses is called the Saros cycle. And this is one of the dynamic elements that allows science to predict when eclipses are going to come. Absolutely fascinating that these things come in cycles. Here's another fact about eclipses, and this is called the Great Coincidence, that the moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, but it's also 400 times closer. So they appear to be the same size in the sky. If the moon was even a little bit further away, it wouldn't match up with the sun so perfectly, and we would never have total eclipses. If it was way closer, it would block out the entire sun and the corona, and you'd never get a total eclipse with the corona. The fact that the moon and the sun appear to be exactly the same size is a very interesting coincidence in space science. This is something we need to know, that the phase of the eclipse when the moon completely covers the sun is called totality. So totality is when the sun is completely gone, and that's when you can take off your protective eyeglasses. If you're watching any early part of the eclipse, you need to protect your eyes with special glasses. But during totality, you can take those glasses off, the sun is gone, and it's dark enough to see planets and stars in the sky. So totality, which we now know is the main phase of the eclipse, can last a maximum of 7.5 minutes. That's the theoretical maximum. If you take all the geometry in the sky and add it up, you can't have a total eclipse that lasts longer than that. But normally, eclipses last between 2 to 3 minutes. I've never seen an eclipse that lasted 7.5 minutes, and I hope I do one day. Earth is the only planet that sees a total eclipse of the sun, which is amazing when you think that we have so many planets in the solar system, and now we know that there are hundreds of moons in the solar system, but none of them have the right size at the right distance to create a moon that covers the sun up exactly perfectly. Earth is the only place in the solar system where you can see this phenomenon, which I find also fascinating, that you have to be a human to see this. Those of us who chase eclipses, of course, we see each other over and over again at eclipse locations around the world. I would say there's probably only maybe 1,000 or maybe 2,000 people at the most who love eclipses as much as I do. And we help each other plan trips. We get together to hire airplanes and to get hotels and cars and Jeeps to get us to where we need to be. And we've become quite a close community of people who love this one event. And we see ourselves over and over again around the world. And here's a really interesting fact too. This might have changed a little bit since we had an eclipse in 2017 through America, but the average person, when you look at the entire world, will never see a total eclipse in their lifetime. So the chances of actually meeting somebody who's seen one are essentially zero. So a couple of lucky people, I would say maybe even a million or more, no, many millions of people in 2017 were able to see an eclipse when it came through America. And I've got some really great video clips of how people felt about the eclipse.
It took less than 3 minutes to cause the crowd to roar. And yours truly almost cried. People here are literally cheering as this takes place. This is just a phenomenal feeling. It's hard to describe what it's like being inside the path of totality. People here are literally cheering. Within minutes, day turned to night as the temperature dropped, right before an amazing show high in the sky. It took your breath for a minute.
Yeah, I was like, and then I was like, oh my God, this is really happening. And before I knew it, it was over and I was sad.
This is something that I will be dreaming about and thinking about for the rest of my life.
Crowds erupted in Carbondale, Illinois, where the darkness lasted longer than nearly anywhere else in the country.
Unbelievable. I'm so glad we got to see it.
Now we can look at it. Oh my God.
There it is. Wow.
You can see the stars.
You can see the planets.
Oh my God. You guys, I'm actually crying. This is the most incredible thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
Oh, it's emotional. I can't explain why, but it is. We had tears, we had screams, we had fireworks during totality, but it just took my breath away, the whole thing. It's really cool that you can see the corona and you see the sun kind of spewing out from behind the moon. It literally took our breath away for a while. So I'm so excited for everyone to experience this. Oh my God!
Oh my God, look at this diamond ring right in the pictures. Look real quick.
God, this is so creepy.
Look at the diamond ring.
Guys, watch out, watch out, guys. Guys,
Oh my
God. God. Oh my God, it's so freaking dark out high. Watch out, watch out. Guys, watch out. Oh my God. It's black. Oh my God. That's Venus. Oh my gosh. Guys, look at Mercury.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh, look at the corona. Get the binoculars.
Oh my God. That's Mercury. In the middle. Oh my God. So dark. Oh my God.
Make this out in the video, but this is...
Oh my God. Look at this right now. Look at this right now. Look at that. That's what it looks like right now. Oh my God. So, oh, look at how dark it is.
You could see like the halo of the sun, and it was literally just like a black spot in the sky. And it was
Looks like a hole.
yeah, I don't know what I was expecting. I don't know if I was expecting it to be like smaller, but it was like it was big. It was really cool.
You know, when you see pictures of it and the pictures are like, wow, cool. But when you see it,
see it with your naked eye, and it's not a photograph. It's just right there in the sky. That's amazing. I'm totally glad I missed school.
So is there anything better than listening to people losing their minds seeing an eclipse of the sun? I really think it's the best thing in the world. I'm like that all the time. When I see eclipses, I lose my mind because it's the best thing that I've ever seen. So that just gives you a very short idea of the life and the world of an eclipse chaser, how eclipses work. And if you guys have any questions about any of that, I'd be very happy to answer them.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, David, as always. Yeah, let's dive in. Miss Holland's class got their stuff working. So grade 7's Bentonville, Arkansas. We're going to turn to you guys first. If you have a question, I'm going to unmute your mic and
You have a question. Okay, Megan.
Okay. You said that NASA has maps to tell you like where to go to see the eclipse, but how do they know like where it's gonna be?
Yeah. So David, how does NASA know where eclipses are going to be? How do we predict these?
Well, the easy answer is that the NASA guys are super smart. Like they're just really smart guys. No, the human beings have been watching the motions of the planets and the moon in the sky for centuries. And over time, we have built on the knowledge that we've learned from the past to the point where we understand the movements of the planets and the moon and the sky extremely well. And once you start applying all of the math and that the physics that rules how the moon moves, you start to understand how the shadow will intersect with the Earth. It's actually fairly fundamental planetary science and celestial mechanics. So it's all done by, over the centuries, a lot of very keen observing and then developing the mathematical skills to understand how to predict where the planets and the moons are going to be, and then what the effect of the shadow will be. So it's all the development of the physics and the math over the years that allow us to now produce these terrific maps and these animations like the ones that we've seen.
And just to confirm, it's not something that's just like the next few years, like 200 years down the road, we know where an eclipse is going to be, correct?
Absolutely correct. The solar system works in a very predictable clock-like fashion, and it's actually with the computers that we have now that can make, you know, 1 trillion calculations per second. It's pretty easy to make these predictions now.
Very cool. All right, I'm going to turn to Mr. Hall's class, who incidentally would be the class that would be closest. I don't think they saw totality in Canton and Michigan, but they would have been closer than the other two classes. So I'm curious both for a question from you guys and what your experience was in 2017, if you guys remember that and went out and saw whatever element of the eclipse you saw.
Yeah, we do. It was partial, and the sky was not totally dark like we saw in the pictures. But we're more familiar with lunar eclipse, you know. So, but we do have a question here, and it was Annie.
When is the next eclipse and where is it?
Yeah.
Fantastic question, and I'm ready for that.
No kidding.
Let's take a look at this. So we've got about 4.5 years to go until we have the next total eclipse of the sun coming to anywhere near where most of us live down here in the United States and across Canada. So if you're willing to wait 4.5 years and you've got nothing to do on April the 8th, 2024, then I would talk to your parents, talk to your friends, talk to the rest of your family to make sure that you see the total eclipse of the sun that's coming up in about 4.5 years or so. This is, you cannot miss that. It's coming so close to where we live. In fact, it's coming right through the middle of Texas. It's moving right up along the eastern seaboard, past where I live in Toronto, and then through Canada and across Newfoundland. So millions of people are going to get a chance to see totality like we did in 2017, and it's not that far away. So you cannot miss this event.
Very cool. In fact, it looks like it goes right through Dallas. It's really close to Toronto where we are, so you don't have to travel that far next time, David. And then, yeah, so pretty much every class is pretty close to this eclipse. You can you'll either have it right where you are, or you'll be able to go about an hour or so away and be able to see it. So
yeah, I mean, it's worth traveling, even if you have to drive for a half a day or a full day. These things do not come around that often. So the fact that we have one in 2017 and another one so close in 2024 means that you cannot miss it. It is worth every effort that you make to stand in the shadow of the moon.
Very cool. All right, let's go to Miss Elliott's class. If you guys have a question, come on up. Any questions in Dallas, guys?
Yes. Go ahead, you gotta say it a little bit louder.
Where was the longest eclipse recorded?
Where was the longest?
Yeah, the 7.5 minute one. Like where is the longest one we've ever got?
Well, that might have happened pre-recorded history, because I'm not aware of any eclipse during my lifetime or in recent lifetimes that actually lasted 7.5 minutes. So that is the theoretical maximum. So if you have all of the elements perfectly in place, then you have a 7.5 minute eclipse. That doesn't mean that it happens very often. If you want to actually find out when that happened last, that information actually is available from Eclipse Chaser websites as well. I don't have the date at hand, but I can find that for you, or I can tell you which website you need to visit. But I'm not even sure if we're going to get one of those while any of us are alive, unfortunately.
And the longest one you've seen is a little over 4 minutes, yes?
No, the first one that I ever saw in Mexico was 6.5 minutes, and I didn't realize how lucky I was the first time.
Okay, very cool. All right, let's go back to Miss Holland's class. If you guys have a second question, go for it.
Second question.
Is this your hobby or do you take it as a career?
Hobby or career, David?
Well, the line has become a little bit blurry because I did start out doing this as a hobby. My career is working in the film and video business. So I make videos and I write and I operate the camera and I do all those creative things in making videos. But since I could make videos of eclipses and make documentary programs, so then my career skills started to help me a lot with my favorite hobby. And now I'm out in the world speaking about eclipses and talking to people about the science and the experience of eclipses. So it has become a little bit like my career, but I still have to work in the video business to pay for some of the travel that I need to go on. So I'm very lucky that my hobby and the work that I do is almost the same thing.
On that note, we mentioned 2017. Was that like a fantastic time for you? Did you get a chance to do a lot of stuff before that eclipse came and during the day itself?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was working with the eclipse chasing community for 5 years before the eclipse came, trying to figure out how do we tell people this is happening? How do we get eclipse glasses into the hands of potentially 300 million people, you know, because that included Mexico and Canada. So the eclipse chasing community and members of the science community were busy for 5 years before that eclipse, trying to get organized, making videos. I made a film to promote the eclipse. We got it out to millions of people. We had community-based groups who were helping local communities understand what was going to happen and trying to get sponsorship to get glasses into the hands of people. And I think we did a pretty good job, but a lot of planning goes into these events.
Very cool. All right. Mr. Hall's class, come on and back up, guys. Second question in Michigan.
Where's the toss?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Zara, we have like multiple questions here, but we can only ask one, and I don't want to. Zara, go ahead.
No, ask one. Yeah, great.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. If you chase total solar eclipse, do you also chase lunar eclipse?
Yes. We didn't mention lunar eclipses. Can you explain what those are too, David, before we dive into that?
Yeah, I thought I would leave lunar eclipses out because they're quite a different phenomenon. So, you know, and we don't have an hour, but lunar eclipses are when the moon in its full phase disappears into the shadow of the earth, behind the earth. You always see that at night. A total eclipse of the sun happens when the moon in its new phase blocks out the sun, and that always happens in the middle of the day. So they're almost opposite types of experiences, even though the celestial mechanics are very similar. You have an alignment between the sun and the moon and the earth. Now, because the lunar eclipses, when the full moon goes red, happen at night, it's an event that's actually happening in space. So anybody who's on the nighttime side of the earth, so that might be 3 billion people, if you have clear skies, can look up and see the full moon that's been turned red by being in the shadow of the earth. Whereas with a solar eclipse on the day side, the event is actually not in space, it's happening on the earth. You have to stand in that tiny dot of shadow, otherwise you miss the entire thing. And then only maybe a few thousand people will see it versus 3 billion people who might have seen the lunar eclipse. So they're related, but they're very different type of events. And yes, I love lunar eclipses also.
No kidding. All right, but not as cool as solar eclipses, which is the greatest thing you can see from the earth.
Yes. Exactly.
All right. And then we'll wrap up with one last question. By the way, so Mr. Allstaff, if you guys have more questions, I'll pass them on to David at the end. So that's easy to do. I know sometimes we get more questions than we can possibly cover, but we appreciate the enthusiasm and we're happy to share those. So yeah, let's wrap up with Miss Elliott's class. If you guys have a second question, go for it.
So when a storm comes, an animal will usually act strange. Do animals act the same way for a total eclipse?
What a cool question.
Absolutely terrific question. And the answer is yes. Because animals, just like humans, get used to what's called a circadian rhythm, which means the day-night rhythm. When we sleep, when we're awake looking for food, then we go to sleep again and we're awake looking for food. And then when the total eclipse comes during the day, it's almost like we have an early night. And that really confuses a lot of animals and especially a lot of birds because we're used to the same rhythm over and over again. But when the eclipse comes, animals get very confused because it seems like night has come and it shouldn't be. So birds will go back into the trees and just, try to stay safe, and they'll make all kinds of funny noises. When I was in India, there was a cow who was nearby where we were observing from. And when the eclipse came, he'd lay down in the middle of the road, and then he wouldn't move for an hour afterwards. And the police had to come and move the cow so that the cars could go. He was so confused. I think he didn't know what to think. But there have been studies done where people actually only look at the animals. What are the animals doing? The different birds, the different kinds of animals that are in the location, to see what the reaction is. But the consensus seems to be that we interrupt the day-night cycle with this sort of fake night. And the animals aren't sure what to make of that. So they definitely respond to the eclipse happening.
I don't think we've ever got that question in any one of your presentations before. I'm really glad we did. Great answer. David, before we wrap up, is there any last thing? You mentioned sites that we can turn people to, and I'll share those with classes, but where can people go to learn more about eclipses and find out how they can get to the next one in 2024?
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just put up my my website here so that you can see what it looks like when you hit the web. So this is what the Eclipse Guys website looks like. This has all kinds of information about eclipses. It's got a lot of stuff about my travels and some of the films that I've made, which are really, really fun to see. A lot of the stuff that you saw today and more. A lot of information about the upcoming eclipses that you can see. And there's also links here to get to other websites. If you Google NASA Eclipse, you'll get a wealth of information on the science side, where you can see some of the maps and the predictions. And then around the world also, if you're great at Google, you can find a lot of websites like mine where chasers have put their own particular experiences up and are sharing their experiences of eclipse chasing with the world. So my site here is very heavily weighted towards the films that I've made, some of the appearances that I've made in the news talking about eclipses, trying to get people excited about seeing an eclipse. And that's mostly the focus of my website. But a simple Google search with NASA and Eclipse will get you all kinds of websites that have all the information that you could possibly need.
Very cool. And we'll share that all right when we're done. David, where's the next eclipse you're going to personally?
I'm going to be on a cruise ship that's going up the west coast of Chile in about 14 months from now. So December 2020, the next total eclipse comes off the Pacific, crosses the south part of South America, and then goes straight into the Atlantic. And we're going to position ourselves right in the middle of that path so that the eclipse is right overhead like that. And hopefully we get clear skies.
Outstanding. Well, fingers crossed, and hopefully that goes outstandingly. David, what we do at the end of every session, as you know, I'm going to demute everyone's microphone. So boys and girls, if you guys could join me in saying a huge thank you to David for joining us today. You are all now demuted. Go for it. All right. So yeah, do look for that email. Thank you guys so much for all the students joining us today, and check out the rest of our Space Month sessions on YouTube and active and coming live in the next few days. We really appreciate you being a part of this fantastic month and celebration of space. David, thanks so much again. Always a pleasure having you.
Thanks so much for having me.